In Venezuela, as part of his electoral campaign, the presidential candidate of the Great Patriotic Poll, Nicolas Maduro, was received by the people of the state of Zulia to accompany his candidacy for the elections of July 28th. In Cuba, the third ordinary legislative session of the National Assembly of the People's Power continues on Friday in Havana as part of its 10th legislature. And in the Netherlands, the International Court of Justice has ruled by 14 votes to 1 that Israel must immediately cease all new settlements activity and evacuate all settlers from the occupied Palestinian territories. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Venezuela, as part of his electoral campaign, the presidential candidate of the Great Patriotic Poll, Nicolas Maduro, was received by the people of the state of Zulia to accompany his candidacy for the elections of July 28th. With a large mobilization, the inhabitants of the municipality of Paraguaypoa expressed their support for the candidacy of the current Venezuelan president in the fight against the blockades imposed by the United States and its European allies. The candidate for the Great Patriotic Poll thanked the people for their support to defeat the actions of the extreme right and promised to continue working for the welfare of the nation. Maduro also recalled the historic battle of the indigenous communities to defend their lands from the genocidal European colonialism of 500 years ago when they arrived to the Venezuelan territory.
Hace 500 años,
500 years ago, colonialism came to all of America. And in this peninsula and in these territories, the people resisted the genocidal colonialism of Europe. They could not eliminate the Guaya culture, nor the ANU. I can say to the world that these 1.5 million white and these thousands of ANU who preserved their lands, their language, their culture, their identity, their spirituality, are an example for all of America of how a brave people resisted and was capable of transcending history.
On the other hand, the presidential candidate for the Great Patriotic Poll reiterated that the historic violence perpetrated by the European colonialism 500 years ago cannot go back to the Venezuela of the 21st century.
We must feel proud of the history we have lived. We must feel proud of our ancestors. Because that gives you a sense of belonging, roots, spirit, strength. What did colonialism do when it arrived in America? There were 100 million men and women in all the peoples, from north to south. In 50 years they exterminated 80 million, and then enslaved those who survived.
At the end of his electoral campaign, the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, led the inauguration of the Paraguaypoa Aqueduct Network and Pumping Station located in the indigenous Bolivarian municipality of Guajira in the state of Zulia. The president affirmed that despite the sanctions imposed by the United States and its European allies, the potable water restoration project carried out by the revolution will be functional in the next 15 years. Maduro also called on the Venezuelan people to vote in the presidential elections of next July 28th to continue strengthening the country's basic services, which the ultra-right wing plans to privatize if it comes to power. For the upcoming presidential elections on July 28th, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela is using a new strategy to bring out the vote called 1 plus 10 plus 7. Let's see more details in the following report by our special envoy, Brian Meyer.
With less than 2 weeks left before Venezuela's presidential elections, supporters of all 10 candidates are working hard to bring out the vote. The governing Socialist Unity Party has a long history of popular mobilization, but this year they're using a new strategy to bring out the vote for incumbent President Nicolas Maduro, called 1 times 10 times 7.
Every one of us is capable of mobilizing 10 people and convincing them to find 7 more. And during these days, we have to do it in a way that is objective, clear, precise, and disciplined. We have to be efficient and effective.
Using an old tactic of asking every party member to convince 10 people to vote for him as a starting point, President Maduro is asking them to ask each person they convince to vote for him to try to convince 7 more. The number 70, which is the potential number of votes each person can mobilize using the strategy, is symbolically important. If former President Hugo Chavez were alive today, he would celebrate his 70th birthday on Election Day.
I am raising people's consciousness, including my family, my children, my nephews, and my mom, by reminding them what we have achieved and showing them and explaining things that the government is doing now. Not by making up stories, but by telling the truth.
How well is this new 1 times 10 times 7 strategy going to work? The world will find out on July 28th when millions of Venezuelans go to the polls. Brian Mir, teleSUR, Caracas.
In Peru, social organizations called a general strike and marches to demand the resignation of Dina Boluarte and the dissolution of parliament. During the day, the General Confederation of Peruvian Workers, together with trade and political unions, mobilized from Plaza 2 de Mayo in Lima. The General Secretary of the Confederation explained that they are also carrying out a national popular civic strike to defend the rights of the citizens and the popular classes. Likewise, the National Human Rights Coordinator joined the movement as an act of protest against what she described as a corrupt, authoritarian and anti-rights coalition of the government and Congress. In Nicaragua, thousands of citizens celebrated the 45th anniversary of the triumph of the Sandinista People's Revolution. The Nicaraguan people commemorated the struggle against the Somoza's regime with street decorations. In this sense, citizens mobilized from the early morning of this Friday through Bolivar Avenue to Chavez with the purpose of witnessing the fireworks in commemoration of the date from the Hugo Chavez traffic circle, while the carriers conducted caravans along the main roads of the capital. In this context, the revolutionary triumph in Nicaragua put an end to the Somocista dictatorship, which remained in power for 45 years under the tutelage of the United States. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Cuba, the third ordinary legislative session of the National Assembly of People's Power continues on Friday in Havana as part of its 10th legislature. With the presence of the first secretary of the party and president of the Republic, Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, the Assembly approved the law of administrative procedure, the law of migration, and the law of the system of honorary titles and decorations of the Republic of Cuba. According to the Minister of Justice, Oscar Silvera, the law of administrative procedure constitutes a significant advance in the regulation of administrative law in the country, having as its premise the absolute defense of the rights of Cuban citizens.
The National Assembly, sum and synthesis of the country that we are, voted unanimously almost all its agreements. That provokes not a few criticisms from those who do not know that behind that agreement there are long and intense days of work, debate, and search for consensus, based on the collective interest. And I think it is worth saying it, Cuba is not led by one person, not even by a small group of people. This is the rare dictatorship that the enemies of the revolution will never be able to understand. The dictatorship of the workers, the dictatorship of the people that those of us gathered here represent, by popular election. That is why what we discuss here is a guide, and what we approve is law.
On Thursday, the European Mediterranean Seismological Center reported that a 7.3 magnitude tremor shook the mining region of Antofagasta in northern Chile, with no reports of casualties or material damage. According to the EMCS, the seism occurred at a depth of 128 kilometers and it was felt in regions of Bolivia, Peru, and Argentina. However, the probability of damage in Chile is low. Although no immediate damage was reported, the National Disaster Prevention and Response Service stated that it was investigating possible damage to people, disruption of basic services, or infrastructure resulting from this earthquake. In Ecuador, a forest fire affected 120 hectares in the city of Girón and Santa Isabel in the southeast of that jurisdiction due to the high levels of heat registered in the area. The authorities at the site activated an emergency operations center to address the damage, while the fire brigades of the three cities are trying to control the fire. The Secretariat of Risk Management informed that so far no houses have been affected, but warned that the fire is still active. The governmental entity detailed that during this season, the low humidity level in the atmosphere and the scarce cloudiness, as well as the increase in wind speed and ultraviolet radiation, favor the creation of forest fires. The Brazilian government reported that 96% of the fires in the Pantanal biome have been controlled or extinguished, but control teams are still mobilized in the area. The Ministry of Environment and Climate Change reported that 56% of the fires have been extinguished, while the remaining 40% are in the process of being controlled and 4% are still being fought. In this sense, the entity warned about the forecast of a heat wave with low humidity starting next weekend, increasing the risk of new fires. In China, floods caused by rains leave at least 5 people dead and 8 missing in the center of the country. In Baoji City, Shanxi Province, the rains caused floods, landslides, damage to infrastructure, among other effects. Rural roads, as well as 21 bridges, were affected by flooding in several localities. Rescue teams evacuated more than 7,800 people and managed to restore traffic, communications, and power supply. The U.S. multinational technology corporation Microsoft presented a massive failure which caused a worldwide computer system crash. Several airports, media outlets, banks, and hospitals around the world have had to interrupt their operations as the company assured that some systems could continue to experience problems. The flaw was caused by a bug in the CrowdStrike security system update, which caused a critical error in the operation of the Windows operating system. The failure generated delays in scheduled flights of several airlines, with incidents in Australia, Hong Kong, India, and Europe. Likewise, in the United States, all flights of several major airlines were affected due to the technical problem. From Spanish airports, and air navigation warned that an incident in the computer system was producing alterations in the systems and in the airports of the network in the whole Iberian country. Gradually, the companies reported that they have been recovering some of their systems. We have a final short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience. You can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In the Netherlands, the International Court of Justice has ruled by 14 votes to 1 that Israel must immediately cease all new settlements activities and evacuate all settlers from the occupied Palestinian territories. Through a public session, the deliberation began after hearing the arguments of the Palestinian side and 49 member states of the United Nations organization. In turn, the ICJ found that Israel's legislation and measures constitute a violation of the International Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination and apartheid. The court ruled that all countries should stop recognizing Israel's illegal presence in occupied Palestinian territories, and the regime must provide compensation for damages to all affected persons in the region. On Thursday in Israel, hundreds of citizens marched in Jerusalem to demand measures from Benjamin Netanyahu's government to guarantee the end of the offensive in the Gaza Strip and the return of Israeli prisoners. Demonstrations took place in the vicinity of the residence of the Israeli Prime Minister, whom protesters accused of being the main responsible for the continuation of the conflict in Gaza. This way, demonstrators demand that Netanyahu reaches an agreement with the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas for the liberation of Israelis held in Palestinian territories. This comes after the head of government provoked the anger of the citizens by stating that the hostages are suffering but not dying.
Personally, I'm protesting to end this war, to end the suffering of our soldiers, and to end the suffering of the Gazan people.
A new briefing claims the Israeli genocidal regime cut down the water supply of the Gaza Strip by 94%, using water as an everlasting weapon of war against the Palestinian population. According to the Oxfam non-governmental organization, the Gazan population currently received less than 5 liters per person per day, a little less than a third of the minimum recommended in emergency situations. Israel caused the destruction of Gaza's water and sanitation infrastructure, reinforcing the United Nations and other human rights organizations' denounces of the use of water as a war weapon against Palestinians by the Zionist regime. In Kenya, the High Court overturns the ban on protest in and around the Nairobi Financial District, a decision taken previously by the country's acting Inspector General. The police order to ban the demonstrations was taken under the pretext of guaranteeing public security after alleged attempts of criminal attacks. The National Human Rights Commission detailed in a report that after days of protest, at least 53 people died, another 575 were injured, and more than 1,200 were detained. President William Ruto, after the pressure of the protest against his government, validated the arguments of the demonstrators and invited them to hold a dialogue. The Nigerian army neutralized terrorist groups in the Tijaberi region in the northwest of the country. The Minister of Defense stated that they captured another 30 members of the armed groups in 3 regions bordered in Mali and Burkina Faso. The Security Department stated that they increased the extension of the army deployment in this border zone, but due to their recent escapes from the maximum security prison of Kouto Kale, which caused civilian death in Tijaberi. They stressed that most of the escaped prisoners are members of terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and the self-proclaimed Islamic State, representing a threat against military personnel and the civilian population. In India, a passenger train derailed nearby the Gonda town, triggering at least 2 deaths and some 31 injured. The incident occurred as the train was covering the route between the cities of Dibrugarh and Chandigarh in northern India. In the aftermath of the accident, the Ministry of Railways ordered to pursue a high-level inquiry into its causes and indicated that the families of the fatal victims and the injured will receive compensation. The passengers who were unharmed were transferred by bus to the nearest town, from where a special train was waiting to take them to their original destination. We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram and TikTok. With teleSUR English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.